Well, first of all, in case people don't know, a little bit about No More Red Dots.
Right.
When that got started and what it is.
Okay, we were doing the work from about 1995 on until about 2011, 2012, before we got the name No More Red Dots. Um, Councilman David James and Councilwoman Sherry Hamilton at the time came to me with a title, No More Red Dots, and asked could I do a program around that. And I said, sure, give me the outline. They didn't have an outline, so we just went from scratch. And we started out with 6 people doing gang and drug intervention work that evolved into gun violence intervention.
And red dots usually typify what?
Typify it's a notation for where a homicide happens on a police map. And so the impetus is that we're going to try to do what we can do to stop the red dots from being on the map.
And what was it with your background? What was it? Because Eddie, when I worked at HAS, I said you and Dwayne were some of my first
Right.
contacts
Right.
with gang violence and just
Right.
violence in general and young people and
Right.
guns. So what's your expertise?
Well, my educational background is primarily in criminal justice. My bachelor's an art major. I was going to change the world through a paintbrush, and that didn't happen. So we did my postgraduate. All of it was in criminal justice, and so a lot of because at that point I went from thinking about being a lawyer to thinking about being a criminologist to feeling like I need to get more hands-on, try to do a lot of proactive stuff, slow it down as best we could, because we've always had the problem of gun violence. The more guns that became available on the streets, everything went up a notch. And then when heroin came back again as a drug of choice for a lot of people, it went even higher. So then you got an influx of a lot of money and access to a lot of weapons, military-style weapons.
Let's talk about what we're seeing now. I think homicides are now over 100.
Right.
I mean, they're way up. Carjackings, I think I read, are up 400%.
Right.
What is the current environment? What is going on? Is it because of the pandemic, because of protests? I mean, what are the connectors here?
Well, the pandemic has an impact, mostly because it forces us to have to reallocate a lot of resources in terms of human resources, medical stuff, law enforcement, and all like that. So there's definitely an impact. But I think what is a bigger impact that we're seeing on the streets is that we've got a lot of individuals, particularly young folks, who them in possession of a gun is illegal from the start. You know, a lot of those kids have guns and no accountability. Nobody's responsible for an under 18-year-old who has a weapon. Sometimes they even come to court on their own, by themselves, or come from custody with no adult person there other than advocates and court-designated workers and so forth. So that's a whole separate piece from having a high influx of drug dollars in our community. And a lot of the homicides are not just drug-related or even having gun-related. It's as much retaliation, the perception that you're holding up your family's name, you're retaliating for disrespect and those kinds of things like that. These are things that have been going on for 2-3 decades now. We've witnessed those things happening for that long, but this is bigger. This because there's more of it, and I think we a lot of times look early on. I say in the '90s, in particular, early 2000s, we were looking for gangs that looked like the videos in the movies, when in fact you're talking about individuals who were scuffling over drug territory and those kinds of things. So there's a lot of factors, a lot of causal factors, and the difference between our organization and some others maybe is that we try to do hands-on with the individuals who we have identified to be potential shooters and or potential victims. So if you could take a shot at changing the attitude and the behavior, you got a chance to maybe change the whole dynamic, the whole arena. You know, so we do it that way, and we try to set up programs that they can participate in that mean something.
Well, let's talk about, because when you have a young person who's in possession of a gun and they're ready to use it because they feel they have been disrespected in some
Right.
way, how do you change that dynamic?
Well, there's a couple of things that have to come into play. First of all, you got to have the right people trying to do it. You got to have folks that aren't afraid of our kids, aren't afraid of our communities and streets and so forth like that. That's one piece. The other part is that they have to be trained in intervention techniques, mediation techniques, and as de-escalators, individuals who can de-escalate situations. The primary thing we have going for us is that I've got 10 people now, down from 30 because of resources and so forth, but 10 people who have 10 different networks. Some of them cross and like that, but the idea is that through our networks, we're able to find out pretty quickly when something happens, who did it, why they might have done it. We of course get notifications on my phone about each shooting, whether it's self-inflicted or whether it's someone else did it to someone else. And so because of the networks, we're able to pretty quickly find out what's going on. We knew within a couple of hours, maybe 4 hours at the most, who Breonna was. We knew that this was a young lady who had been killed, even though some of the early information we were getting from other sources didn't say a young lady or a woman who had been hurt. Mm-hmm. It just said that there was a shooting and suspects were down. Okay, but that's kind of the nature of how we do it. You know, and then once we find out who it is, what happened, then what we try to do is get involved with the people who we can touch in that to figure out what the level of retaliation is, how deep it goes, how many folks are involved, whether there's an organized effort, and then we do a lot of tracking and background stuff to figure out who it is we need to talk to,
So
and whether they're approachable.
let's talk about, everything just seems so unsettled right now. Are the trends we're seeing now that much different from, let's say, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? And what is the difference? Because right now it just seems like we are just on the verge of the abyss with violence and
Yeah.
not a value in life and those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's some of that hadn't changed a whole lot. I think probably the biggest thing right now, and I tell folks a lot of times when we talk about it, we're dealing with two public health issues at one time, and that's the pandemic and gun violence. You know, and they've been with us for a while. We just pay attention to what gets the most noise, what's the buzzword at any given point in time. And then you couple with that a struggling economy, and it's struggling because of the virus, you know. So you've got a lot of folks that are edgy, but you know, let's be clear. A lot of the folks who are involved in gun violence have not paid much attention to the pandemic. It did not influence a lot of their movement or none of that. Mm-hmm. You know, the only thing it really did was made it for some folks it was legal to wear a mask. You know, so it hadn't changed a lot of how folks think. That's why our approach is to affect changes in the attitude and the behavior of individuals who we know are prone to gun violence.
Let's talk about the militias that we've seen coming to town, black
Yeah.
and white, and everybody showing off their weapons, and you know, legally so. But at the same time, what message is that sending, do you think, to young people?
Well, I never delve a whole lot into messages because I never know who's paying attention and that kind of thing. But I think if you're looking for something to impact or influence young people, any of the militia activity is extreme. It's kind of pushing it a little bit. But I view all of that in the same context as I would an assembly program at a school or something. folks come in and everybody ooh and ah for a minute, and then they go home and you go home, and everything gets back to where it was prior to them even coming in. So, but for me, anything that's an image or has imagery involved in it, it has to move the needle of policy change. It has to be involved in how we view each other after you're gone. What impact did that have in that respect? Is there somewhere that we can process what we saw other than in our small groups? Is there some way that we can talk about this whole phenomenon together and come up with something that moves or changes how we execute our law, how we set up our training for law enforcement, how we set up our understandings of each other, and what dialogues we have after all of that happens?
Let's talk a little bit about some of the policy changes that you just spoke of.
Right.
If you could say, here's what we need, boom, boom, and boom, to help this problem that we see in Louisville, Kentucky right now.
Right.
And not just here. I mean, it's escalating other places.
Right.
But it really is, lately with different crimes escalating. What
Right.
would it be if you could say, here's what I would do?
It depends on what you're trying to approach, but I think in large part we need some concrete and profound changes in police training. There needs to be some cultural competency that is certified training as opposed to a PowerPoint or something that's done for an hour, hour and a half, but something where you got to get a certification in. There needs to be some training and accountability between officers. In other words, if I see a commission of a crime, then I'm obligated by virtue of what I signed off on to say something about it. And those things. And then I think we actually need more common sense kind of gun laws. We need red flag laws. We need things like that can let us know when someone has a gun that actually should not. Now, understand, most of the people who are on the street with guns don't get them through legal means, and they don't care anything about the laws. But there has to be some kind of accountability that perhaps is profound when it comes down to a person being caught with a gun that's illegal, a gun that's not registered to them. There has to be something like that. And I think then the other thing has to be ongoing conversations with people who have impact with young people and influence. And for us, with No More Red Dots, we try to talk to the individuals who aren't necessarily in group rooms or board rooms or any of those kind of things, but have influence over the individuals who have the guns. So, because a real truce, and I use that word loosely, a real truce is going to only happen when the people who give the instructions, when the people who have the influence decide, I want to help make my streets safer for my family as well as other families. And we got to figure out a way that we get folks to try to work on living for somebody instead of dying for them.
Right.
If we get them to
change that dynamic.
Yeah, we got to flip that some kind of way, see.
Because it's so troubling to me how many young people
Right.
continue to die in this city. And,
Right.
and I mean, it's numbers that should alarm all of us.
We had a 14-year-old early this morning. That was killed downtown, and 3 o'clock this morning, in fact. And as painful as it is, and you say to yourself, if you're in this work, at some point I'm gonna become jaded to this. Each one hits you. Each one's different, and you're talking about 30 years of taking these hits. But at the same time, I know that I got to keep doing what I do, because I always get the answer when I pray about it. Who else?
If not you,
Yeah.
then who?
Then who?
And then we had, just that completely heartbreaking case as well of a 3-year-old.
Right.
I mean, what community where a 3-year-old is shot and killed?
Yeah, I mean, we're actually in a lot of them, but I think one of the problems, I guess because we know a lot of the backstories, and I'll say this without going into a lot of the detail on it, sometimes the parents create situations that ends up impacting the whole family, including the babies. And if you don't do anything else, an individual who decides to embark on a life of crime and mayhem and showing off weapons and money and all of those kind of things like that, need to understand that they are not an island, especially if they have children or people that they care about. Their activities, their behavior impacts everyone around them. And so when you make someone upset or angry that is not necessarily tuned into the bigger picture of society, they don't really care whether you got a child with you or not. And then if they just shoot up a house, and that's another whole thing that a lot of people seem to do, because houses don't usually shoot back. Shoot up a house, you don't know who's in it. You don't know who's sitting where, who's watching TV where, none of that, sleeping where. You just firing randomly into the house. So, and that in itself is a violation of the law.
Right. Let's talk about some of the root causes of some of this. Short tempers,
Right.
lack of opportunity,
Right.
the fatigue, the pandemic, all of the above. Social media
Right.
fits in prominently with
Yeah.
this. How do we overcome? I mean, Eddie, we've talked about this for
Forever.
30 years.
Yeah.
And then we have flare-ups and we're like, are we any better off than we have been in the
Yeah.
past?
You
Or
know,
is it worse?
I think it feels worse because of the magnitude. We don't get a chance to discuss very often just how severe the problem is. So folks go by, if you're going by your imageries and you're going by what Spooky Electric shows you, you end up thinking that you've got an answer, that this is solved because that case is addressed. But the impact of a bullet hitting the target goes long beyond the case. You're talking about, it could be in the millions of dollars that one bullet impacts when you talk about medical folks having to attend to it, law enforcement folks, corrections people, legal people. When you look at all of that off one bullet, then you're talking about very high magnitude. I think social media has its part, but just as easily as social media can put you in harm's way or put you out there on some kind of street fame, it can also convict you. It can also give persons who are trying to get at you inroads for doing that, whether it's legal or not. So matter of fact, we use social media quite a bit to take a look at who's associated with who. As we look to try to figure out how we do this. Now, understand too, we have a comfortable relationship with the courts and law enforcement. We don't bother them; they don't bother us. Because we're not trying to solve cases or send people to penitentiary. What we're trying to do is stop people from shooting each other.
Right.
And other folks take care of all of the legal
You're trying
stuff
to relieve
and all
the
of that.
pressure in the community and
Right,
get to those
right.
people
See,
before they pop.
Exactly. And if we're successful in what we do, then law enforcement has less to do. The courts have less to do. If we're successful, the hospitals have less to do. So it would just make sense to me that our communities would be more about investing in de-escalation and intervention on the front end as opposed to dealing
Waiting
with
until it happens.
Yeah,
and then changing in society, whatever, and I think I go back to what you said, because I think that's the brilliant part of all of this, is how we get people to realize that the real honor is standing up for somebody by living
right
versus dying.
Right, being a monument to the person that you love that's gone. In other words, I know my friend would have wanted me to be successful, to help other people to be successful, and I do this in their name, as opposed to I'm gonna get revenge or avenge your death, even if I die trying, and
that
that's
dynamic's got to change.
it just don't. Yes, that's what we gotta, and that's incumbent on everybody.
Right.
I mean, if you've got 6 hours with a child every day, then you need to be teaching that to them about the value of life, the value of living for something or somebody. We call it a sense of purpose. we try to instill in all the kids that we do group sessions with and conversations with. Here lately, there's been a lot of Zoom stuff, but this whole idea of living for something, having somebody that you want to pay back through your success, you know, that invested in you early on, the time and energy, and if you feel like you owe them something, if you feel like you owe them something and they were killed in a gun-related incident, you still owe them, but you owe them your success. So you got to keep trying that way, and the sense of purpose plays into it that way.
2 more questions.
Okay.
Where do you find hope? Because you said today you're dealing with a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
I mean, where do you find hope in these dark times when you see, I mean, kids, babies being
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, we're getting a lot of opportunities to talk about it, you know, through media and people like yourself, but you've always given us the opportunity to talk about it, you know, but I think we're not shying away from the conversation like we used to. It used to be a West End problem. Now it's a people problem. And I've got probably more hope now than I've ever had in that respect. In the fact that everybody's concerned about it now because they don't know when the shootout is going to happen at the store that they frequent. You know, they don't know when the person with the gun and the derangements is going to show up at their Kroger. They don't know any of that. See, so now it becomes a thing of
it's a universal
yeah,
conversation,
it's everybody paying
which
attention.
it hasn't been in the past. I agree
No, we
with
did
you
not.
on that.
Yeah, we definitely didn't have that at all. It was and a lot of times in the early days when we were doing gun violence intervention stuff, it felt like we were doing it by ourselves and preaching to the choir every time we said a word. You know, but I don't know. For us, it was a thing of individuals like yourself giving folks the opportunity. I can remember one time in particular when you allowed the kids we were working with to talk. Now they had little specifications like they didn't want their faces in the footage or nothing like that. But that was the first time anybody from the media had given them a chance to talk. It was a very emotional day for everybody.
But you wanted to hear. You have to hear from them.
Exactly, because
and if
those
you
are the
don't,
ones.
how are you ever going to understand?
That's right, and that's the only way you can understand it. So when you know what they're thinking in terms of their vulnerability, and we always think that they think they're invincible. They know their invincibility only lasts for so long. And I even now have a young person that will be being released from custody Wednesday, and he doesn't expect to live to be 20.
Oh.
And he's 17 today. He turns 18 on Wednesday, and he thinks he'll be lucky if he gets to 20. So
It's heartbreaking.
it is, and I'm telling him. Then that gives us a 2-year window to get you to where you can get to be 30. You know, and so we've identified some things in the conditions that keep him where he is, and some activities that he need to be about doing. And so we're gonna, you know, through our mentorship program, we're gonna be with this kid. He's gonna get sick of us.
Oh, I hope he makes it to 30
Yeah.
and well beyond.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Eddie, what would you say to folks? My last question to you.
Okay.
Louisville, wake up, and here's how you can do it to what we've got going on here. What would you say to people?
Right.
That this is your platform to say, come on, folks.
Okay. I know we got to pay attention to the pandemic and pay attention to social injustice and all of that, but we've got an ongoing issue with gun violence. We need to pay attention to what we do in terms of the laws, in terms of training the people who are first responders, in terms of how we invest in the whole issue. You know, we've been struggling with funding since 2019, actually since June 30th, 2019. So, and a lot of folks, there's a commitment to doing the work that the team that I have. And so what we have to do is figure out how we do the work through having to have jobs, figure out how we help other cities who call every day, because somewhere along the line, they've heard about how we do it and the impact. We trained some folks in Indianapolis, and the year after our training, they had an 8% drop in homicides and shootings. And they attribute a lot of that to the people who live there and doing the work, and the fact that we trained a lot of them to look at it a little bit differently. So the investment is a good investment. It's just a question of getting folks to tune into not just No More Red Dots as an organization, but organizations like ours, if there are any, you know. But if we're getting calls from California and other places like that, then I think we might be pretty much ahead of the curve. So I think that's one part of it, and the other part is keep having conversations that are hard to have. Keep talking about the stuff in terms of what my role needs to be. How can I change things some? And understanding that teaching peace is not a part-time job, it's a full-time job, and it's not a quick fix. It's an ongoing thing that you got to do on a regular basis for a long time across generations. I think we'll get there.
Thank you, Eddie. Thanks for the work you do too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.